Money FM 89.3, best of weekends.
Making sure that people who are maybe just a little bit older can stay employed or get re-employed is very much at the forefront of discussions in the business community in Singapore. Take us through where you see this topic right now.
It's actually, I think, both a difficult topic and an opportunity. It's difficult in the sense that for the entire 20th century, there was really very little reason to invest in people over the age of 50. But as the world changes and we start making a living with our brain rather than with our back, people are living longer, the body does not wear down as quickly. And so you have people who are aging and keen to continue working. And that's really what turned us to the science. How can we help people who either want or need to work longer do so?
So what is the science? You know, we always think about the brain and aging and the classic narrative. You know, you get older and you start to decline. And what is the science telling us about our brains as we get older?
Well, there is a bit of truth to what you're saying, Glenn, that around age 40, Mother Nature kicks in.
Yeah.
Decline.
Don't I know it?
I feel you there. Decline is inevitable, but decline is not absolute. So the history here, again, is that in fact, I had a CEO tell me, if I can find somebody who's in their late 30s, who can do the same work as somebody in their 50s, but for 75% of the cost, I'm going to go with the younger person. Yeah. But again, it doesn't have to be that way. And the science is unlocking amazing opportunities.
This idea of cost benefit of having an older employee, many times the notion is, oh, the older person costs way too much money. I can get rid of them and I can hire 2 people or 3 people in their place to do that job. Are you finding that thinking is still prevalent, and is it accurate?
So absolutely prevalent. Accurate, it depends, because that kind of thinking applies to every generation. I can go out and find people in their 20s who the output to the salary ratio is unfavorable. You can find people in their 60s where the output to salary ratio is unfavorable, or conversely, in the 60s where it's favorable, in the 20s where it's favorable. So it applies to everybody. Now, what changes and what the science is uncovering is that there are actually what I call business critical and life critical higher order thinking abilities that actually peak in our 50s and 60s, meaning that if businesses want to benefit, they need to be investing in these people, but investing in the right way, which is different than the way you invest in a prototypical 32-year-old.
That sounds pretty complicated. Is it easy to break down?
Yeah. Okay. So sorry. So that's the professor coming out this morning.
The one thing I love about talking with you, Mike, you're such an academic and you know this stuff so well. But, for those of us that, maybe didn't do so well in school, I need to have it simplified for me.
Well, let me make it really, really simple. At about age of 18, your brain is best at memory. You can memorize really, really well. At 32, your brain is best at dealing with the volume of memory and processing everything really fast. So this is why we tend to look at that prototypical 32-year-old as an ideal employee, because they've got so much stuff and they can process it.
Okay.
But here's where things get really cool. And think about how the world has changed today. 45 to 55, you're going to peak at your ability to manage complexity. In your late 50s, you're going to peak at innovation. In your late 50s. In your early 60s, you peak at your ability to strategically focus, to look at what matters most and push away the distractions. Now, quite interestingly, your 20 and 30-year-olds are worst at that. And then in your early 60s, you peak
Can I
at
just can I put you right there? Because, typically when a company looks at innovation, the big word that everyone's using these days and have been for years now, they think of, well, we got to get the millennials in the room, get the young people in the room to help us figure out how we're going to innovate next. And that doesn't sound to be 100% true.
Not 100% true. You're absolutely right. And as I look at this, it depends on who you talk to, but you want the entire spectrum. Okay, there's a famous study that came out showing that when you have decision making in groups that'll include that 30-year-old and include the 60-year-old, the decisions they made were 2.5 times better than the age homogenous groups. So it's about integrating these diverse mental abilities across the lifespan.
Does this not fly in the face of everything that we generally see happening in companies? As some people get older, except if they're maybe the CEO, they're going to stick around, but they try to find ways to get rid of those older employees, or at least, encourage them to take early retirement or something at a point when they should frankly be keeping them on in certain roles. Is that correct?
Exactly. And again, this is that yoke of history. It's the legacy that if you go back just 40 years, where making a living with your back was comparatively more important than today. The HR policy that you stop investing in people at 50 made a lot more sense. But as we look at the neuroscientific discoveries the last 15 to 20 years, and we realize that not only are we doing knowledge work, but the world is more complex, more dynamic, more unpredictable. All of these mental abilities that peak in your 50s and 60s are what businesses need, but HR has not yet caught up with the science of this.
So how do we use the science to build better brains when just reskilling isn't enough? And the Singapore government has done a great job of offering reskilling programs, upskilling, getting people back into the workforce. How do we add in what you're talking about to make this a 100% slam dunk?
Can I use a metaphor here?
Sure.
Think about a computer. We've all upgraded software on an older computer before, right? What happens when you do that?
In my case, my computer crashes and I end up going to buy a new one. But anyway, that's just me.
So at a minimum, it slows down further.
Yeah.
As I logged in this morning, it took about 4 minutes to log in because the laptop's getting older.
Sure.
Well, Skills Future, metaphorically, Skills Future is your software upgrade.
Yeah.
You're giving people the latest and greatest on design thinking, or how to do coding, or how to function as a leader through coaching rather than command and control. So it's all software upgrade. What we're looking at is the hardware upgrade, because the brain at 50 and 60 does not work the same way it does at 32. And if you treat that older employee the way you treat the 32-year-old, you're going to be disappointed. You need to invest in the hardware before you upgrade the software.
Very interesting. We're talking with Michael Netzley, the CEO of Extend My Runway, an AI-driven platform founded here in Singapore, trying to make scientific discoveries accessible to anyone who wants better brain power, stronger ability to work within dynamic work environments. Michael, let me just ask you this straight question. Why should Singapore care about your research and what you're doing with Extend My Runway? How is it going to better help workers here and society here?
Well, the Prime Minister has a wonderful quote, and a couple years ago he told us that Singapore is aging faster than any other society on the planet. So by 2030, we will have grown old faster than Australia or the United States. Take your pick. In addition to that, we have multiple studies. We have multiple studies talking about how many people are not yet ready for retirement. And then you add to that the low birth rate, you add to that immigration restrictions, whether it's COVID or whatever. Where is a business going to get the talented employees that it needs in order to deliver that business to customers every day? Part of that, inevitably, is going to be looking to the aging workforce, but you have to treat them differently.
And it's got to be more than just the aging workforce is going to be working in hawker centers to, clean up trays or working in fast food establishments, right?
Oh, absolutely. One of the really big global trends right now, look at the number of encore careers, so people after the age of 50 who are becoming entrepreneurs and starting their own business. I mean, this is not unique to Singapore or the United States. You'll see this in every aging society around the planet. People are looking for ways to continue contributing because they have more healthy years in the middle.
Talking to Michael Netzley, the CEO of Extend My Runway. Michael, what does the ideal structure look like? If you've got a company and you've got workers from that 60-year-old bracket all the way down to 20s, what is that? What should it look like to get the best use of those age groups?
So I don't know that there's going to be an ideal structure, but you do need the mix. And to illustrate the point, think about businesses that have a lot of legacy hardware in place. Energy, heating and cooling, logistics, the ports, these would all be examples. You're probably going to see more older employees in those kinds of industries, where with the hot deep tech startups, you're probably going to see more young employees. But having said that, the basic challenges don't change. We're all working in a VUCA world. We don't know where our business needs to be 3 years from now. We may claim we do, but the reality is we don't. Yeah. And so in order to help the organization navigate that path forward, you need that broader neurodiverse skill set. And that's really what I would be focusing on if I were an executive or HR.
Some out there listening to this would say that's fine, but to be honest, those older employees are costing us a lot more money, and we perceive that we're getting less value out of them. How does the thinking have to change around compensation or how you use these people in a full-time or part-time capacity, the older workers perhaps, to maintain them as part of a team?
Right. Well, the first thing you need to do is stop relying on perception and start measuring. And so that's part of what our solution is going to do, is how do we actually measure the output that comes from each individual? So that way we have data. We have data. But second of all, we have to start changing not only the way we invest in the older employee, but we also need to start thinking about changing expectations around salary. It's going to be a curve rather than a straight upward trajectory. And we also need to start thinking more broadly about contracting and job roles. So a real simple example. What happens if you have a lot of legacy infrastructure and you have two people who say, look, we've been with the company for 30 years. We're willing to provide you 45 hours a week, but together, maybe this week I take 20 and they take 25 and vice versa. So you'll have some job sharing. But in addition to that, so many contracts in Singapore today say, if you work for me, you cannot do anything else. Well, you're okay, I can't go develop a side gig, but you're going to get rid of you want after the age of 50. Yeah. So, think about the burden being placed on society when you do that. So there's some real challenges here that have to be talked about.
There's definitely got to be some give and take in terms of how these relationships are managed, right? When you go forward, let's talk about women, because many senior executive women in the workplace now they're being encouraged to break the glass ceilings, have done so in many cases, are now getting in the boardrooms. Are women now going to be facing that ageism as well, where they are also let go due to high cost or whatever. And how should women be incorporated into thinking about this challenge?
If we look at it today, women honestly face two challenges. One is going to be the age-based challenge, but the other is going to be, again, that legacy of we're still catching up. But what happens, Glenn, if we jump ahead? What if we can look into the future? And I would say that by looking at Japan, you can. And when we look at the employment data in Japan, not only do you see older men and women working even into their early 80s and still have a 10-year retirement after that, but proportionately you see more women working. And that raises the question, will other aging societies see a similar trend, that the deep pocket, that the available pool of employees in this age segment is going to be disproportionately women? And how do we proactively prepare for that, invest in that, change our HR policies, change our mindsets? But if we look in the future in that way, I think it looks more encouraging for women, if anything.
Very interesting. Now, your Extend My Runway AI platform is now going to be debuting soon. Is that correct? How would a company interact with you to figure out what they need to do, how they need to think about their staffing?
Well, the model's actually pretty simple. We do a profile at the front end, just like we would do today using psychometrics or what are your math skills or your English competency, et cetera. But we do one that is brain-based. What's your processing speed? What's your memory? What's your innovative thinking? Your integrated reasoning? All of that. And
you do this with all the employees in the office, or what is that?
Well, with whomever they run through the program. And so from that point, we basically say, here's where your brain's operating really well. Here's where your brain could be improved. We're going to help you then do the sorts of exercises and behaviors that will strengthen those kinds of mental activities. We'll remind you every day to do these things.
Right.
And on top of it, we'll even run a couple of courses so that you know how to work with the young folks and integrate everything together and make it a winning team.
Well, so it all can work together. And I had a comment from Mike Ang, one of our Facebook watchers, viewers, talking about digital transformation has to kick into the old mindset, right? Using the digital tools that are currently available for flexible working hours to support the gig economy, those types of things. And this would sort of dovetail with what you've been talking about too, right?
It is. And in fact, our MVP is in market right now, and it is actually focused on digital transformation, helping people think differently about this 4-year journey that is ahead of them. But again, it comes back to the same basic issue. If you're not sleeping, if you're not fit, if you're multitasking, you've got brain fog, you're hyped up on caffeine, your brain's not going to do what the work requires you to do.
You've just described my weekend, Michael.
I've described probably 80% of the workforce in Singapore, right? We do everything that works against the brain, but then we say, go reskill and learn more.
Fascinating discussion. Michael Netzley, the CEO of Extend My Runway, thanks so much for being with us today. How can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more?
The easiest way is just on LinkedIn. You'll find either myself or Extend My Runway on LinkedIn, and we'll have lots of interesting articles coming in the next couple of weeks.
Michael, thank you for being with us on Money FM.
Thanks, Glenn. It's been fantastic.